Hey guys, Mike here. Bit of a different kind of bit of content today because we're coming up to the end of the year and I realized that 2023, the end of 2023 marks 5 years of me being an independent podcaster and content creator. And I wrote an article on LinkedIn, of all places, about podcasting and my personal reflections on doing this for 5 years. It's crazy to me that I have been doing this for 5 years, but I actually just wanted to kind of go through the words that I wrote and kind of expand on them a little bit. This is just genuinely my reflection of my thoughts on podcasting, sort of my thoughts on podcasting as an industry, but also just like what makes a podcast continue. Maybe this is good advice for any of you who want to start podcasts, who have thought about starting podcasts, or just someone who wants to hear about this industry. I'm going to read the article sort of verbatim and expand on bits, but here's sort of where I started. The end of 2023 marks my 5th year as an independent podcaster. In 5 years, I've produced hundreds of hours of content across multiple platforms, fostered a loyal community, started a Patreon, a Discord server, sold merchandise, performed live podcasts, and have had millions of views, listens, and likes across all platforms. I started podcasting in my dad's garage when I was 23 years old. That is true. And the industry has changed a lot since then. I've seen many podcasts come and go in this time, so I thought I'd give some thoughts and reflections on what helps keep a podcast alive and why so many podcasts fail to last. And that's true. I did start podcasting in my dad's garage, but now this podcast has spanned through probably 4 or 5 different places I've lived. All started in my dad's garage with pretty bad gear. Now I have like pretty much a fully fledged studio here in my house in Richmond. And it's really cool. So here I basically wrote 4 kind of things that I think are important if you want to do a podcast. And, you know, I have seen my content expand a lot. Like, I don't view it as just me being a podcaster now. I'm a content creator. This podcast is probably one of my main products that I put out, but then I repurpose a lot of the content across multiple different platforms in multiple different ways, which you'll come to hear I think is important. But number 1 is you have to be patient and really love podcasting. Here's what I wrote. I see lots of people start podcasts that run for 5 to 10 episodes before quietly discontinuing them. Here's the thing. Podcasting is hard. It takes a lot of work between writing content, setting up gear, recording, editing, producing, uploading, and distributing. Not to mention marketing your podcast through video and social clips. Now that's really important to think of. I'll just pause there. Like, I think a lot of people think podcasting is just you just sit down, you hold a microphone, and it's really easy, and like you just upload it. It's a lot more than that. You know, this podcast in itself, like there's a set now, like, and I've learned this over the years, like there's 3 lights here to the right of me. There's another light, like a backlight pointing to the other side of my face. Behind me, there's another light that sort of makes this blue kind of ambient thing. This is all just setting wise. I've got my Mac Mini over there that runs my audio interface that runs through my Rodecaster. So I record straight onto my Mac. And, you know, I've got 4 microphones. I've got sounds, like all the sounds you hear in my show. Those are all pre-prepped, like everything like that. And just writing the content, which is definitely really hard. Then you record, then you have to edit, then you have to produce, then you have to upload and distribute. And then if you want traction, you've got to make clips and everything like that as well, which I think a lot of people just think it's sitting down and speaking, which if you're an independent podcaster, you're going to be doing most of the work by yourself, and you need to really work hard to keep all your content ticking. I go on and I said, a lot of people think their podcast will naturally gather hundreds of thousands of listeners and naturally fall into people's ears. It never works like that. That is the main thing you need to realize if you're starting a podcast. It never works like that. If you're making a podcast because you want to make lots of money or become very popular very quickly, you'll be disappointed. I make podcasts because I love the entire process as a creative endeavor, as a chance to connect with like-minded listeners who enjoy my work. I love setting up my gear. I love editing. I love cutting highlight clips, and I love interacting with listeners. I might not have the highest downloaded podcast in the country, but I have devoted listeners that I want to show up for every week, and that's important. I have seen countless TikTok influencers, models, all these people be like, I'm starting a podcast. Here's my podcast. They do a couple months and then it quietly just disappears because they realize, oh, I'm used to my TikToks getting 100,000 views and I have like 1 million followers on TikTok. Why is my podcast not getting the same amount of traction quickly? And they don't like that, so they stop. I've seen it time and time again. If I did that, like this podcast wouldn't have lasted a year. We're now in our 5th year and I'm really excited to keep going. Podcasts don't work like that. It's less about just getting, people want numbers really quick. It doesn't happen like that. You have to grow it over time. And it's not just about a podcast anymore. Which brings me into point 2. People need to see your podcast, not just hear it. Here's what I wrote. For me, audio simply isn't enough in the current state of podcasting. As difficult as it might seem, videos are an essential part of podcasting. You need to have clips, short and longer form, to promote your show and get people to see what you're doing, not just hear it. That's one of my biggest points. And good friend of mine and podcaster Lewis Spears once said to me when I was starting this podcast, I wasn't doing video. And he said, people don't want just another podcast to listen to. You need to show them your podcast. I actually think if you're just doing audio on your podcast, you're automatically putting yourself at a disadvantage. People aren't going to stumble across your podcast. They need to see it and like it, and they need to see it everywhere, which I'll continue. This takes time, effort, and skill. I often see people using AI video generators to cut clips, but I believe, at least at this point, that a human touch is still needed to cut engaging video that feels authentic. I see a lot of AI generated stuff and it's honestly not good. It just isn't where it needs to be, and one day it will be, and I kind of hate that because I like that there's a human touch to my videos, but I don't think it's a good idea to just be funneling your content through AI to spit out clips because I don't think you're going to get the result you want. You might. I go on. This means full videos of your podcast should be uploaded to YouTube and even to Spotify. Spotify recently allowed full video pods, and now I put full video pods on Spotify. And for a while I was like, nah, I'm not going to put full video pods on Spotify. But then I was like, well, why wouldn't you? Why would you not put full videos on Spotify if you've got them? And then it pushes the audio out to everywhere else. Essential, in my opinion, essential. Have full videos. Some people want to watch podcasts on YouTube. Some people want to listen to them. Some might want to watch on Spotify. All of the above is good. You want people to be able to access your podcast anywhere. Utilize your videos across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube too for maximum exposure. If people don't listen to your full podcast, you still want them to see it, so make your content available for them in every single form. And that's what I do. I have my short clips under a minute, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. I have longer form clips, 5 to 12 minutes that go on YouTube, and then I have the full videos. Then I have the audio. It's a full-scale model of content. I clarify that. Want super quick bites? Head to TikTok. Want longer 5 to 12 minute clips? Head to YouTube. Joe Rogan does it, so why shouldn't you? I've never listened to a full episode of Joe Rogan's podcast, but I've seen a lot of his clips on YouTube, and if one looks interesting, I'll just click it, right? And I think that's where your brand awareness comes in, because people are seeing your podcast on YouTube. They click on your clips. You start building a different audience. They might not be full podcast listeners, but they still like your content. Joe Rogan puts clips from all these episodes on YouTube. I'm not saying, well, I do think Joe Rogan is kind of like the gold standard of podcasting because he's the biggest podcast in the world. But it's a very clever thing to do because not everyone's going to listen to every episode of your pod, but they will click on clips and they will be like, yeah, maybe I do like this guy. Number 3, do a live show. Just do it. There's nothing more amazing as a content creator or podcaster than meeting and interacting with the people that love your work. The best way to do that is a live podcast. Live podcasts are a growing form of entertainment and can also help your podcast grow. Give listeners a discount if they bring their friend along. If you're nervous about performing live, like I was, just remember these are people who already love your show, so it's a soft landing. Then just do your best. And of course, I did my first live podcast in February 2023, my other podcast, Harry Potter and the Boys. It was really fun. I do want to do another one for 20th Century Boy, my main podcast in 2024, so watch this space. But again, that point rings true to me. Meet your fans, meet your listeners. Your listeners are the people who like your work. So they obviously like you. Do a show, meet them, hang out with them. That's what I like. Like, I love meeting people who like my podcast and then just realizing we're really similar people and chatting to them. To me, that's what podcasting is all about. As an independent podcaster, it's not about like the corporate side of it and monetizing everything. It's about human connection and community building and fostering. And that's what I love about it. Final point, number 4, make the content easy for you. That is my main point on podcasting. And here's what I mean about that. I'll read out what I wrote. This one is really important. In my opinion, this is the biggest hurdle for people getting into podcasting. Generally, people tend to create interview-style podcasts that are entirely based around guests to create content. This creates an extra job, booking guests each week, which is extremely time-crunching for an indie podcaster. Once it gets too hard to keep booking guests, the podcaster often folds. And this is so true. I see it all the time. All these new podcasts coming up. Oh, we're having the big conversations. We're skipping the small talk. We're having real chats, right? And the interview podcast market is so saturated. Like, off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of a bunch. There's Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. There's Joe Rogan. There's Tim Dillon. There's who else is there? In Australia, we've got Uncomfortable Conversations. We've got Willosophy. You know, all of these interview talk shows, they're like, these ones that I just said, most of them are like the top of the top in their market, right? So I think you need to think about why you're doing an interview podcast in an already extremely saturated market, not just podcasts, but interview podcasts, and how that's going to go for you. I think you're better off either doing a podcast by yourself where you foster all the content, or with a friend that you can rely on and depend on, and that you both are in it for the same things, right? Here's what I wrote. My main podcast is a solo podcast. This is 20th Century Boy. With the tag, the conversations you wish you were having about the stuff that no one else cares about. I chat to my listeners about my thoughts on the week's pop culture and nerd culture. I don't rely on anybody else to make my content. It's just me and the inside of my mind. Some people may find it daunting to speak solo for 45 minutes a week, but the more I did it, the more natural it became. And that's true. I originally started the podcast because I wanted to get better at having conversations. I wanted to get better at organizing my thoughts, and I wanted to get better at going out and meeting people and being able to be confident and talk to them. And my podcast really helped with that. I was never doing it to make money. I was never doing it like because I wanted to be popular. I just wanted to do a podcast to strengthen and get flying hours up to make my speech better. Like, I was always really bad at speaking. I was bad at having conversation with people. I wanted to be better at it, and it really worked. That's the main thing. Often I see people doing them in groups, and then one person, can't commit. Then suddenly they're doing from weekly eps, which is what I think it needs to be at least, to fortnightly, and then there's one ep a month, and then the podcast is dead, right? And the podcast disappears. Those are my thoughts. Either sustain it yourself or do it with a friend where it really feels natural and you want to hang out with them and the podcast becomes your hangout. That's what I ended up doing with Harry Potter and the Boys, my second podcast, where my friend Sam Garlep, who's one of the funniest comedians in Australia, he comes on every week. At first, I was organizing a guest every week, nearly killed the podcast because I couldn't sustain it. Then I asked Sam if he wanted to do it. He said yes, and now it's really easy for us to orchestrate it and make it happen. So that's my thoughts on that. That is the biggest hurdle, okay? I finish off by saying not many people would know this, but I like to listen to a lot of AM and talkback radio during the day where hosts need to sustain content solo for often hours in a row. And this has been a crucial part of me developing. If you're worried about doing solo shows, go and listen to some AM or talkback radio. They are doing that. And here's my conclusion of this article. Podcasting is tough, but rewarding. It's a special way to form a bond with people you might not have ever met. Just don't get too disappointed if you don't get the traction you want straight away. Consistency is key, along with simply making the process easy for you. If you don't love the podcast, your podcast won't survive in the long run. Make it easy for you. And my one more thought on that is, once you've got it going, I've actually moved past the perfectionism of my past, where I used to re-record episodes, I used to cut heaps out. Honestly, and some people might disagree with this, my philosophy on this is I'm more concerned about being there every week for my listeners than making every episode 100%. Now, that's not saying I'm phoning it in, but there are some episodes I record, I get to the end, I'm like, oh, I don't feel like that was like the best, and I didn't have as many ideas or thoughts as I wanted, and I feel like I could have added more. But to me, it's more important, not everything has to hit 100%, because once you're there every week and you're appointment listening, people will like what you say. Well, they clearly will, because they'll keep coming back. I don't think it has to be 100% perfection every time. And if you get caught up in that, that's another way you start to hate the process. Those are my thoughts. If you've watched or listened to the end, thank you. If you've gotten something out of this, please leave it in the Spotify or YouTube comments below, or get in touch with me any way you can. Just Google Radio Mike Podcaster. You'll find me somewhere on the internet. Would love to hear your thoughts. And I also wanted to just quickly, it's not the end of the year yet, but I do want to say thank you. 5 years of podcasting. I've had 2 podcasts. I'm super happy and I'm stoked about where this is all going and where my podcast journey is going. I'm hoping to have another 5 and more beyond that. But yeah, thank you so much if you've ever listened to or consumed my stuff. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'll speak to you soon. See you later.